Okay, picture this. You have a massive, ultra-luxurious real estate utopia planned in Goa. But instead of pristine villas, the project hits a literal dead end, plagued by terrifying, inexplicable phenomena. Today we're unpacking the Silêncio Dossier. It's this incredibly dark, fascinating collision of British colonial history, the horrors of the Indian Ocean slave trade, and what exactly happens when modern development tries to violently bulldoze over ancient indigenous traditions. Let's get right into it.
So it really begs a massive question. Can a piece of land actually remember the violence of its past? For about 2 centuries, Ilha de Silêncio, a 200-acre estuarine island, just sat quietly with its overgrown ruins. But the exact second a modern developer tried to pour concrete and transform it into a resort, the land pushed back. And I mean pushed back in ways that completely shatter our logical, rational frameworks.
You've got this developer, Devendra Shirodkar, and he had a highly structured, rigid, concrete vision for a place called the Elysian Khazan. It was supposed to be absolutely perfect. But the reality his construction crews faced was literally terrifying. We're talking twisted steel perimeters, advanced GPS coordinates inexplicably shifting by meters at a time, newly poured concrete that just stayed, mysteriously, stubbornly porous. The modern blueprints simply refused to bind to this ancient soil.
And the micro-narratives of this haunting, they are so visceral. This wasn't just a streak of bad luck, it was systematic. Heavy, reliable diesel excavators would suffer these sudden, violent hydraulic ruptures, but only when they operated near the ruins of an old villa. Newly poured foundation trenches would just suddenly flood with highly saline water. And those twisted fences? Workers would find heavy steel posts pulled straight out of hard laterite soil overnight, with absolutely zero signs of heavy machinery or even human footprints left behind. No way, right?
Now take a look at how this maps out, because this is where a genuinely eerie pattern emerges. Every single time the developers pushed further into the earth, deep excavation, sinking boundary fences, they triggered a corresponding physical and spectral anomaly. It's literally a precise matrix of cause and effect. It directly links modern spatial disruption to ancient unseen spiritual boundaries.
So what exactly was pushing back? Well, the terrified labor force consistently reported encounters with an entity known in local folklore as the Devshar. They describe this towering, muscular figure wearing a white turban, a woolen blanket over his shoulder, and carrying a chiming bamboo staff and a burning palm frond torch. He's the ancient guardian of traditional paths. Workers who foolishly tried to build past dusk reported being hypnotically led deep into the mangroves by a flickering light only to wake up at dawn miles away. It's a classic, terrifying punishment for spatial transgression.
But here's the thing, the Devchar wasn't alone. As the digging went deeper, the site was plagued by the Samanda. These are restless, earthbound ancestral spirits. Workers were hearing the horrifying sounds of heavy chains dragging and disembodied weeping. And this is right where the ghost story becomes a crime scene. Because those auditory phenomena, they got chilling physical validation when modern excavators actually unearthed hand-forged iron shackles, chains, and commingled human remains buried deep inside the mud of the embankments. Okay, to understand those shackles, we need to peel back the historical layers. Let's zoom in on the Anglo-Portuguese protectorate period, right between 1799 and 1815. This was a super turbulent era of British military occupation in Portuguese Goa, heavily driven by anxieties over French expansion. It was inside this chaotic, largely lawless window that the intense, foundational trauma of Ilha de Silêncio was actually forged.
Right during that occupation, you have a British military contractor named Captain Arthur Vance and a corrupt Portuguese fidalgo named Diogo de Miranda. They set up a clandestine joint venture, completely bypassing metropolitan legal constraints, to build this massive estate called the Vila de Solidão. And to reclaim the surrounding marshes for their grand villa, they tapped straight into the highly active, unfree labor networks of the Indian Ocean slave trade. They trafficked individuals from East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the local hinterlands.
The labor conditions were unimaginably brutal. Building those massive protective dikes to hold back the tidal waters resulted in an extremely high mortality rate among the enslaved workers. And to dodge administrative audits and the Goan Inquisition, Vance and Miranda denied these victims any proper burials. Instead, they just buried the deceased directly into the mud and laterite cores of the reclaimed embankments. That systemic, horrific desecration is exactly what fundamentally violated the metaphysical boundaries of the island, creating those restless Samanda spirits. So, developer Devendra Shirodkar is facing terrifying phenomena, constant equipment failure, and absolute financial ruin. He hits pause.
He initiates this exhaustive geological and historical survey of the island's forested, untouched interior plateau. And what the survey team uncovers is a profound archaeological revelation that predates all of that colonial trauma by over a millennium. Hidden right in the central ridge of the island, they find the Caves of Silêncio. We're talking 5 incredibly rare, 5th-century rock-cut chambers carved entirely out of laterite, which is a notoriously difficult rock for fine sculpture. 3 of the interior chambers housed basalt Shivalingas on stone altars. This confirmed a deep, historical Shaivite presence with striking architectural parallels to the famous Arvalem Caves of North Goa.
And the history went even deeper than that. Spreading out toward the riverbanks from the caves was this dense concentration of prehistoric petroglyphs, chipped right into the rock using primitive stone tools. They found icons like the humped Zebu bull, a massive 2-meter unicursal labyrinth representing spatial containment and the cycles of life, and even astronomical sundials made of circular cut marks. This island wasn't just colonial ruins, it was an ancient sacred sanctuary.
But here is the real kicker. These ancient caves were not abandoned. They were actively inhabited by the Goan Kars, the original men of the soil. These secretive, indigenous Gauda and Velib tribal communities had been living on the island uninterrupted in close-knit hamlets. They were the quiet guardians of the laterite caves and the sacred anthill shrines of the earth goddess Bhumika. Ultimately, their oral traditions and ancestral wisdom held the exact key to solving this entire mystery.
This brings us to a massive turning point. The tribal clan elder, Babu Jalmi, took one look at the modern development and diagnosed the core problem in just 2 words: spatial violence. He explained that the developers' rigid, modern concrete boundaries had physically and spiritually severed the ecological arteries of the land. The concrete had literally trapped the suffering Samanda spirits and completely blocked the ancient patrol paths of the Devchar Guardian.
So the elder lays it out plainly. To cure the haunting, the developer has to completely abandon modern, speculative land division. Instead, he had to embrace the Goan Kari system. This is an indigenous, communal, and ecologically integrated model of living with the land. It's a cooperative framework that actually respects the unseen historical and spiritual boundaries of an environment, rather than stubbornly trying to overwrite them with a layer of concrete. Amazingly, they listened. The healing began immediately with a deeply structured tribal reconciliation process. First up, the Goan supplication, a communal prayer rite at the boundary line to seek pardon from the Devchar and the spirits of the enslaved. Next, the Naman invocation was sung to salute Mother Earth and the natural elements. Finally, they erected a gumti. That's a permanent laterite shrine with a red flag at the site's main intersection to honor and house the guardian spirit. This ritual brilliantly bridged the indigenous tribal histories with the displaced victims of the estuary.
Now, spiritual healing is great, but the physical engineering absolutely had to change too. Those rigid modern steel fences that were inexplicably sinking into the mud, completely dismantled. In their place, the developers restored the ancient Khazan system. This is a traditional wetland management system that uses communal ecological engineering to literally work alongside the tides rather than fighting against them.
Out with the concrete retaining walls and in with indigenous engineering. They built thick mud and clay dikes reinforced with organic, natural straw. They installed automated tidal sluice gates crafted from rot-resistant madi wood. By utilizing these brilliant, time-tested components, the estuarine waters naturally flowed right into protective reservoirs. This instantly cured the soil salinity, stabilized the subterranean water tables, and finally allowed the foundation concrete to cure to maximum strength.
The developers even went so far as to redesign the entire layout of the modern luxury villas. They committed to respecting the Shima Vilo, those are the traditional unseen pathways of the Devchar. By purposefully leaving clear, unbuilt corridors of old-growth mangroves, they allowed the guardian spirit its nocturnal passage. It's a perfect tangible example of how modern architecture can actually adapt to flow dynamically with nature, rather than stubbornly trying to dominate it.
And finally, to give the restless Samanda spirits some peace, they completely scrapped the idea of leveling the colonial ruins. Instead, the ruins of the Villa de Saladón were preserved as an open-air historical monument. The bones of the enslaved workers trapped for centuries in those mud dikes were formally and respectfully exhumed. They were reinterred in a dedicated memorial park with traditional honors, finally offering closure to the victims of the island's darkest chapter. Ultimately, the harmonious completion of the Elysian Khazan project is an incredible success story, but it leaves us with a really profound question. Is true sustainable development achieved not by erasing history, but by building upon its unseen foundations? The Silêncio Dossier proves that modern urbanization must deeply respect and integrate the ecological, indigenous, and historical memory of the land. Otherwise, the past might just push back. Think about it. What unseen foundations lie beneath the ground you walk on every single day?